Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds, so that you may discern what is the will of God.
There's no question that the person who wishes to follow Christ has to engage in a spiritual warfare, an inner warfare with themselves. There's a work to be done. In the resurrection, in the story of Christ, we marvel at the revelation that God has given humanity of mercy, compassion. But nevertheless, there's a great work to be undertaken, otherwise we never change. And if we don't change, there's no new life. There's no resurrected life.
The new life that is born is this incredible freedom to be the creation that God has called us to be, freed from the bonds that would hold us out of that creation, that full creation that God intended when breathing the breath of life into us. It's such a difficult paradox to get our hands on. I think in the tradition of spirituality about the hard work and the important work, for instance, of self-knowledge, understanding what is motivating my behavior and why, understanding why I am responding to persons in the way I am, and that there's this incredible possibility that I can die to that self which is asking for that motivation toward another, and instead of competition or instead of confrontation, that in fact we could walk together in peace, and in our walking together in peace bring peace that the Prince of Peace intended and came to bring.
If you don't know who you are under God, you don't know yourself. And so we live in the imprisonment of our own ignorance, spiritually speaking. And the spiritual ignorance is self-created hell. And hell is not a nice place to be in.
I think we all have to experience some death of the ego. The ego is a false self that we over-identify with, that we think I am what I look like or what I accomplish or my titles on the wall. And so we over-identify with that, and we expend tremendous energy trying to build that up, shore that up. But that's the false self, and the more we're into that, the more we're imprisoned by it. And somehow there has to be a death to that false self so that the true self in God can start emerging. Often that comes through means that we don't choose, when some of those things that we had prized so highly for our very identity are taken away through illness, or we lose a job and we just think that's the end of everything. And then we discover when we turn to God, and there's another level of being there that we didn't even know was there. And it's like this safety net that we fall into, and we say, oh, that's who I really am, and that's what life is really like. I think that is a kind of death and resurrection experience that is common.
If I could put it in a nutshell, they have to let go of their own selfishness. And this is what's essential to the message of the great mystics. Many times this was done in the past through particular kinds of ascetical practices, but the exterior asceticism of the great saints of Christianity and the mystics really was only a means to the inner asceticism of giving up the self-will, which is the fallen self-will, which is the root of sin. And so in a certain sense, that's the crucial thing, although it can be obviously done in many different forms. There are many different kinds of spiritual practices and programs in all the Christian denominations throughout the course of history.
God is present. God is present. What is in the way is me. I'm in the way of this experience. I'm the obstacle, I'm the block. But in my innermost being is all light, is all energy, is all oneness with everything, with the whole cosmos, with everyone, everything, all creatures, and especially Christ the Lord. Now, these obstacles in the way, though, some are very difficult to remove. So that's my work. And also to be willing to do whatever it takes to remove those obstacles that are in the way between me and God. And I look at it, I've got this tendency towards God, this enormous hunger and thirst towards God and all that is good. I have this enormous drag towards myself and all that is kind of building up more layers to that obstacle.
Most people who are into stuff and into money and into feeling good all the time don't like the thought of losing something. But what you lose is your addiction, is your unrealistic understanding of what life is about. You lose that sense of denial you have about your own mortality. You come to grips with who you are in a very powerful way.
It is very clear that when we are told to sell all you have and follow me, this is not about the furniture. It's about all of the obstacles within us that keep us from being receptive to the reality of the divine, to the presence of God, the presence of the risen Christ in this world.
One of the hells to which we become condemned, especially in our acquisitive consuming culture, is that we give ourselves to the death of putting ourselves at the center of the world. And it is a kind of death, this self-focus, this self-absorption out of which we cannot get, so that our entire life becomes, what do I want next? How do I get what I want next? It becomes entirely perverted and death-dealing instead of life-giving. So that one of my practices is to begin every day, every morning. It's very simple. I have a legal pad by the side of my bed, and the first act I commit every day is to write down that for which I am grateful. I'm literally practicing gratitude so that from the inside out, what I am living on that day, what I'm paying attention to on that day, are all of the gifts, all of the irrepressible gifts from God on that day for all of us, and how I can celebrate those gifts, and how I can be faithful to them, and how I can practice on that day being worthy of those gifts.
A Christian practices those spiritual disciplines in order to respond to a God who has already taken the first step toward them through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And we are not left to our own to become what God is calling us to be. It is not simply by our own efforts that we become Christian, not only in name, but also in character and quality of life. We have the help of the living Christ with us, encouraging us, strengthening us, empowering us to become new. As Paul said, "Behold, in Christ I make all things new." We are transformed through the power of Jesus Christ in our lives.
In religious life, I think there are things we do together and there are things we do alone. And it's important to be able to find a path between community and solitude, to find a community of people with whom to pray together, with whom to hear the Word read, to ponder it, to study it. And also practices that we take into our solitude, practices perhaps of Lectio Divina, of prayerful reading of Scripture, of prayer, of meditation. I think finding moments in every day in which to try to be intentional about fashioning a life with God are the most important.
It's a little bit unrealistic to think you can just sit down and meditate, sit down and pray. when there's this enormous barrage of thoughts in our consciousness. So the first step to prayer is this management of thoughts. This is what we call discernment. Discernment is the way to sort out your thoughts. Our thoughts keep coming from the inside, and you start noticing, that's really evil, and I'm capable of that. Or, that's just myself, and that's coming just all from me. Or, that's God, and I want to go that direction. So my inner work is to sort those thoughts. What is taking me towards God? And those thoughts I want to consent to. And what thoughts take me just to myself, those I want to just hold in check.
Discernment is so fully woven together with the work of self-knowledge. Who am I? Why am I? What is motivating? What is resisting? What is keeping me from? What is at the heart of my vocation? And what is keeping me from fulfilling what is at the heart of that vocation?
So our job is to see our thoughts as they come up on the screen of consciousness and sort them. What's going towards God? What's going towards self? What's going towards evil? First you find that place, and God gives you a sense of silence. There's a silence beyond all the noise that is and in that silence you recognize presence of God that is not you.
This is not just given to us. We must prepare ourselves for it, break through old attitudes and imitations and negative ways that we've inherited from centuries of parents before us, the ways of the world, the ways of our culture, which form us in distorted ways that are opposed to finding God. Each one of us has to see these things within us, the ancient saying, know thyself, and then has to uproot them so that something new can come through. This cleansing has to do with old ways and habits of behavior, everything from the coarsest racism to just impatience and irritation, which seems small in our daily routine at the traffic light in the grocery store, but when it becomes our whole life, then we are polluted with energies that interfere with the presence of God.
We are called by Jesus to the way of the cross, which means we are called to take up our cross and follow him. That means that even as Jesus was crucified in Jerusalem, we are called to lay ourselves, our ego, on God's altar, to sacrifice our simple love of self so that we can begin to be filled with the Spirit of the living Christ and can begin to live the Christian life and be what God is calling us to be.
As we build our family life, as we build a friendship with another, that's really losing your life and finding it by giving it away. And then your true self is born again to a uniqueness. But if you hold on to your life, Jesus says, you will lose it, because that's a false I. We must wake up, and the conversion is not to give your life to God to get more things, but to die to that concentration only upon yourself and using God. You can imagine how God must feel when you ask for this. You really are saying, God, I know you're smart, but listen, do what I want because I know what's best for me. I'm going to do this if you do that. But I'm doing this, but you don't do that. Where's your love for me? We have to discern before we ever ask, is this unto God's glory, not unto ours?
Prayer is a way of facing one's own vulnerabilities in the face of a loving and gracious God. Because in prayer, in honest and sincere prayer, one is naked and open and vulnerable before God. I mean, How can one lie to a God who is all-seeing and all-knowing?
God always answers, but not in the way that we may expect, not in the place or time that we expect, but in somewhere, somehow, the answers will come. God knows where you are at, and therefore you may abandon him or ignore him, but he will not abandon you. And for somewhere, somehow, he will find a way to break into your world and reclaim you.
So you go into that place of the heart every day, and then there's ways to keep that alive during the day. And sometimes it goes cold, but you keep the practices even when you don't sense it. And those practices, even when you don't sense it, the word for that is faith. Practicing faith. And in the Western Christian tradition, we have concentrated so much on the faith that we believe. Who is Jesus? What did he look like? Where did he come from? How do we talk about him? That's the faith, that. But the faith by which that energy, that experience, that presence, that personal Christ, that is faith. That's this big faith. And that's this faith that takes work.
The paradox is, as the mystics say, we must become empty so that we may be filled. So our work, much of it, our internal work, is letting go of what is false, what is infantile selfishness, what is mean-spirited, what is completely focused on the pettiness of ourselves. This letting go frees us to receive something that was always there to be received. We have to get out of our own way.
As we have more daily experience of God's loving goodness, we do really come to experience life more as Christ did. And our trust deepens so that we really are willing to surrender more. We're not so anxious, so controlling, so manipulative. We're more at peace with whatever it is that comes our way because we know that our life is in God's hands.
Meister Eckhart talks about total detachment. Actually, the German word he uses really means cutting away or separating from all individualized cravings that we ourselves have. And the detachment that Eckhart talks about is the only way to what he calls the birth of the Word in the soul, wherein Eckhart claims, and I think many of the mystics agree with him, that the eternal Word who became man for us is born within our souls if we allow ourselves to cut ourselves off, detach ourselves from selfishness, really, you would say.
We must at every moment stay open to that possibility, open to that voice, that light, that mystical transforming experience. And always the lesson of that is extraordinary gratitude and joy for the miracle and the mystery of it all.
A mighty transformation, a metanoia, a change of our being, a metamorphosis, not only is possible, but must take place. And this is where enlightenment and rebirth and new becoming is made possible, and where we can find joy in suffering, where we can find hope in despair, where we can find a strength that we knew not of, where we can love unconditionally.
It is a transformed life. It's a life that Meister Eckhart, to go back to him, describes as living without a why. That is, we live in a certain sense in the way in which God lives, completely spontaneously in a spontaneous service of the good. Now that's a kind of transformation which in many ways may sound paradoxical to us, just as Eckhart's message about absolute detachment when we read it is shocking. But the mystics often want to shock us by putting the fundamental truths of Christianity in a much more powerful and even paradoxical way to shock us out of a kind of slumber and forgetfulness of just how radical the message of the Easter message itself, the Christian message is.
I do not believe we can fully experience the power of the living Christ in our lives until we experience that kind of crucifixion, that yielding up of self to God. To say, God, here I am, make of me whatever you will. In the Gospel of John, this is referred to by Jesus as being born again. The issue of being born again is about receiving the power of the living Christ in one's life, of dying in terms of crucifixion in order that one may be resurrected a new person.
Inner serenity, which is part of the journey of all the teachings of religions and spirituality, is not a feel-good thing. It's what stabilizes us to become truly useful to something higher than us. And until we align ourselves correctly with that greater power by cleansing our own house, cleansing the inside of the cup, as Christ says, it is virtually impossible to move forward into the resurrected life.
We have got to stop believing that right belief is faith. Faith is practicing the work of hospitality, practicing remembering our baptism, practicing the work of attention, practicing the work of love of neighbor and love of God. What would it be to love God with our whole heart, mind, soul, and strength? And how would the entire world be changed by that? We can bring rebirth and renewal to this tradition if we will simply apply ourselves to the work of imitating the life of Jesus Christ.
We first have to know what our pains are. What has given me pain in my life? What has caused me not to grow? What are my stumbling blocks? What is most painful in my childhood and my youth? And to be able to face my own frailties directly and my own shortcomings. And it's very hard to do, and to be able to face it without despair.
Don't despair. There is one line that's open to you. Call upon the name of Jesus Christ. And you say to him, I don't know who you are, but you, whom Christians believe to be the Son of God, I call on to you to rescue me.
Every time the sun rises, in that mystery of not knowing from whence it came and from whence it goes, God is calling me to pay attention to the mysterious, the miraculous, the transcendent, the mystical that is present now in this moment, in sunset, in sunrise.